On the morning of March 24, 2025, a doctor named Gerhardt Konig took his wife, Arielle, on a hike in Oahu, Hawaii. It was her 36th birthday. They had traveled from their home on Maui specifically for this trip. He had planned it. He had chosen the trail, the Pali Puka Trail, a steep, narrow, challenging path along the edge of a cliff in the Koolau Mountains. He had chosen a trail that runs along the edge of a drop that Arielle herself testified she did not want to go near. He insisted. They went. He brought a syringe. Prosecutors say that on that trail, on his wife's birthday, Dr. Gerhardt Konig pushed Arielle toward the edge of the cliff. She threw herself on the ground and grabbed at the earth to stop herself going over. He straddled her. He produced a syringe and vial. She batted it away. She bit his forearm. She squeezed his body with everything she had, trying to get him off. He produced a lava rock. He beat her in the head with it 10 times. She was screaming. 2 other hikers came around a bend in the trail and intervened. They found Arielle Konig on the ground, bleeding, terrified, with wounds to her head, and her husband standing over her. Gerhardt Konig ran from the trail. He FaceTimed his 19-year-old son, Emil, who was back home on Maui. He told Emil that Arielle had been cheating on him. He told him he would not be making it back to Maui. And he told him, in his own words, that he had tried to kill her. He then FaceTimed Emil a second time and said he was going to jump off a cliff before the police caught him. Police launched a manhunt across the Koolau Mountains. They found Gerhardt Konig hours later. He was alive. He was arrested. He was charged with second-degree attempted murder. At trial, he said it was self-defense, that Arielle had hit him with the rock first, that he wrestled it away and struck her twice in response, that he never tried to push her off the cliff, that the syringe was for something else entirely. His son Emil took the stand and told the jury exactly what his father said on those 2 FaceTime calls, word for word, looking at the man who raised him. Tonight, the complete case, the trail, the syringe, the rock, the FaceTime confession to his son, the affair that started everything, the verdict that shocked the courtroom, the sentencing coming August 13th, and the question this case never fully answered: did he plan it, or did something break inside him on the edge of a cliff on his wife's birthday? Every crime leaves a record. Tonight, we read it. Before the syringe and the rock and the FaceTime call, there was a marriage. And understanding what that marriage actually looked like in the months before March 24, 2025, is essential to understanding everything that happened on that trail. Gerhardt Konig was 47 years old. He was an anesthesiologist, a doctor whose entire professional life was built around the precise management of what goes into a human being and what that does to a human being. He had 2 children from a prior marriage. He and Arielle had married in 2018. They had 2 young sons together. In 2023, the family moved from the mainland to Maui. Gerhardt described their life there to the jury as a dream, adventures as a family, a life they had built together in one of the most beautiful places on earth. Arielle Konig was 36 years old on the day of the hike. She was a nuclear engineer, a highly educated professional in her own right. She had 2 stepsons from Gerhardt's first marriage and 2 biological sons with him. She was, by every account from people who knew the couple, deeply invested in her family and in her marriage. Then came December 2024. Gerhardt testified that he became suspicious of his wife after she went on a business trip with a male coworker. He began secretly reading through her phone messages while she slept. He found what he described as extensive personal conversations between Arielle and the coworker, conversations that spanned entire days, with the exchange of photos and song links, with messages that were clearly being deleted as they were sent. He confronted her. She confirmed an emotional affair. She said she would do anything to repair the marriage. She apologized. She said she loved her husband. They agreed to stay together. They began marriage counseling. Arielle testified that the affair was emotional, that it never became physical. She described the WhatsApp messages as flirty. She acknowledged deleting them. She acknowledged that her husband had discovered them in the way he described. She said she was genuinely trying to repair the marriage, and that the birthday trip to Oahu was part of that repair, an attempt to reconnect, to celebrate, to move forward. What Gerhardt Konig was doing in the months between December 2024 and March 24, 2025, whether he was genuinely trying to save his marriage or whether he was planning something on a cliffside trail on a birthday morning, is the central question that 12 jurors spent a day and a half trying to answer. The prosecution said he was obsessed, that the affair had broken something inside him, that he had planned the trip, chosen the trail, and brought the syringe with one purpose. The defense said grief and devastation do not equal intent to kill. The jury found something in between. Arielle Konig's testimony at trial was the foundation of the prosecution's entire case. She took the stand and described in specific detail what her husband did to her on the Pali Puka Trail on March 24, 2025. Her account was described by Prosecutor Joel Garner as straightforward, coherent, and corroborated by the physical evidence at the scene. Here is what she said. The hike began normally. They were celebrating her birthday. They had traveled to Oahu specifically for this trip. The Pali Puka Trail is steep and narrow. It runs along the edge of the Kualo Cliffs with significant drops visible from the path. Arielle testified that she did not want to go near the cliff edge. She said she expressed discomfort. Gerhardt wanted to continue. They went on. On the trail, Gerhardt grabbed her and began moving her toward the cliff edge. She threw herself on the ground. She testified that she was trying to hold on to the earth with everything she had, refusing to let herself be moved closer to the drop. Gerhardt got on top of her. He pinned her to the ground. Then he produced a syringe and a vial. Arielle batted the syringe away before he could use it. She bit his forearm. She grabbed at him with both hands, trying to get free. Then he reached for a lava rock. He beat her in the head with the rock. She testified he struck her approximately 10 times. She believed he was trying to knock her unconscious so he could drag her to the edge and push her over. She was screaming. She kept screaming. She did not stop screaming. 2 hikers, a woman and her companion, came around a bend in the trail and heard her. They approached and found Arielle on the ground, bleeding from her head, with her husband standing over her. Their arrival ended the attack. Gerhardt ran from the trail. Arielle's injuries were documented photographically and presented to the jury. Deputy Prosecutor Joel Garner held up the bloody lava rock during closing arguments, showing the jury the physical object that Gerhardt Konig had used to beat her wife's head while she lay pinned beneath him on a mountain trail on her birthday. The rock had Gerhardt's DNA on it. Her blood was on it. Both pieces of physical evidence were uncontested. Arielle Konig filed for divorce after the attack. Their 2 young sons are in her custody. She has continued to cooperate fully with prosecutors throughout the legal process and has stated publicly that she wants justice not only for herself, but to ensure that what happened on that trail is part of a permanent legal record. The prosecution described her as a survivor who fought back on the cliff, then fought again in a Honolulu courtroom. Both times, she did not stop. Of all the evidence presented in the trial of Gerhardt Konig, the syringe is the detail that the prosecution built their premeditation argument around. And to understand why, you need to understand what it means for an anesthesiologist to bring a syringe to a hiking trail. Gerhardt Konig spent his professional life administering medications intravenously. He understood pharmacology at a clinical level that most people never reach. He knew precisely which medications cause unconsciousness, which cause paralysis, which cause death, and at what doses and in what time frames. An anesthesiologist does not accidentally bring a syringe on a hike. A syringe is not a piece of hiking equipment. It is not something you absent-mindedly put in your pocket before walking out the door on a birthday trip. Prosecutor Joel Garner made this argument with specific precision in his closing statement. He told the jury when the first two plans didn't work, pushing her toward the edge, then attempting to inject her with the syringe, he moved to the third, hit her with the rock, knock her unconscious, drag her to the edge. 3 sequential plans. The prosecution argued that the syringe was not an impulsive decision made in the heat of a moment. It was a preparation made before the hike began. You do not bring a syringe unless you intend to use one. The defense challenged this interpretation directly. Defense attorney Thomas Otake asked the jury to consider the logic of it. If Gerhardt Konig truly planned to drug his wife and push her off a cliff, why would he bring a syringe unfilled? Why would he have to fill the vial on the ground while wrestling with her? If this was premeditated, Otake argued, wouldn't the syringe have been loaded and ready before he ever touched her? The prosecution's response was equally direct. They argued that Gerhardt Konig's professional knowledge of pharmacology meant that he understood that a pre-filled syringe would be detectable if the body were found, that filling it at the scene with the vial itself was the plan, that it would be harder to trace a substance administered immediately before a fall from the cliff if the syringe had not been loaded hours in advance. The jury heard both arguments. They ultimately found Gerhardt Konig guilty not of second-degree attempted murder, which would have required them to find specific premeditated intent, but of attempted manslaughter based on extreme mental or emotional disturbance. Their verdict tells the story of what they believed. He brought the syringe, he beat her with the rock, but what was driving him when he did it, calculation or devastation, is the question they answered in the space between the two charges. After running from the Pali Puka Trail, Gerhardt Konig did not call a lawyer. He did not call 911. He did not turn himself in. He FaceTimed his 19-year-old son, Arielle, who was back home on Maui, and he told him what he had done. Arielle Konig was 19 years old. He had grown up knowing Gerhardt as his father. He had moved to Maui with the family. He testified at trial, referring to Gerhardt throughout as the defendant. That choice, that deliberate and painful linguistic distance from the word father, was the first signal to the jury of what Arielle had been carrying since March 24, 2025. The first FaceTime call came at 10:42 in the morning. Gerhardt was outside on the trail, still in the Ko'olau Mountains. He was wearing sunglasses and a dry-fit shirt. Arielle noticed splatters on the shirt and asked Gerhardt about them. Gerhardt told him it was Arielle's blood. Then he told Arielle that Arielle had been cheating on him, that he would not be making it back to Maui, and in Arielle's own documented testimony, delivered in a Honolulu courtroom while his father sat at the defense table, that he had tried to kill her. Arielle said his father appeared to be at the end of his rope. Gerhardt said he had been thinking about suicide in the months leading up to the hike. Arielle testified that after the call ended, he was so distressed that he went immediately to his grandparents' house nearby and told them what his father had said. His grandmother, Arielle's mother, Judith Mast, confirmed in her testimony that Arielle arrived shaking and crying and told him about the call.
She immediately tried to reach Arielle by phone and tracked her location to the trail. The second FaceTime call came approximately an hour after the first. Gerhardt told Emil he was going to jump off a cliff before the police caught him. He said, "I'm going to go before the police catch me." Emil told his father not to do it. That was the last time Arielle Konig spoke to his father before the arrest. The defense attempted to reframe the FaceTime calls. Attorney Thomas Otake argued that Gerhardt was in deep emotional despair, that the calls were not confessions, but the words of a man who believed he had caused terrible harm to the person he loved and could not process that reality. Otake told the jury Gerhardt saying he tried to kill Arielle was not an admission of premeditated intent. It was the language of extreme self-recrimination from a man in psychological collapse. He said the calls were a goodbye, not a confession. The jury heard both interpretations. A 19-year-old son testified against his own father about 2 phone calls made on a mountain trail in Hawaii. That testimony, delivered without visible hatred, with visible pain, was one of the most quietly devastating moments of the entire trial. Gerhardt Konig made the decision that most defense attorneys advise against. He took the stand in his own defense. He looked at the jury and told them his version of what happened on the Palipuka Trail on March 24, 2025. His account was the opposite of Arielle's in every significant detail. He testified that it was Arielle who first struck him with the rock, that she hit him on the side of the face, that he wrestled the rock away from her in self-defense. Then he struck her twice with the rock he had just taken from her hands. He did not dispute the strikes. He disputed who initiated them. He said he never tried to push her off the cliff. He said he never intended to harm her. He said everything that happened on that trail was a reaction to what she did first, not a plan he had brought from Maui. On the syringe, Gerhardt offered an explanation that the prosecution characterized as unbelievable. He said the syringe was not intended for Arielle. The defense suggested, and this was disputed fiercely by the prosecution, that the syringe had an innocent explanation consistent with his medical profession. The prosecution countered that no innocent explanation accounts for why a man would bring a medical syringe on a birthday hike on a remote cliffside trail with his wife. On the FaceTime calls to Emil, Gerhardt's testimony attempted to recontextualize what his son had said. He maintained that he was in a state of extreme emotional collapse after realizing what he had done, and that the words he used in those calls did not accurately reflect his intent or his state of mind during the actual events on the trail. He acknowledged the calls happened. He acknowledged saying things that caused his son tremendous distress. He said he was at the absolute lowest point of his life. He wept on the stand. He said he had never wanted to harm Arielle. He said he had loved her. He said the discovery of the affair had devastated him in ways he was still processing. He described their relationship before December 2024 as everything he had ever wanted. The prosecution's cross-examination was methodical and specific. Prosecutor Joel Garner walked Gerhardt through each element of the physical evidence: the DNA on the rock, the syringe, the location on the cliff edge, Arielle's documented injuries, asking him to explain each detail against his self-defense. Gerhardt called the defendant's testimony in his closing argument unbelievable. He told the jury that the severity of Arielle's injuries, 10 blows to the head with a lava rock, was consistent with a man trying to knock a woman unconscious on the edge of a cliff. The jury deliberated for a day and a half. On April 8, 2026, they returned to the courtroom with their verdict. Judge Karen Ahn instructed the courtroom to refrain from any reactions.
Then she read the verdict aloud. Not guilty of attempted second-degree murder. Guilty of attempted manslaughter based on extreme mental or emotional disturbance. The jury found Gerhardt Konig stood as the jury foreperson announced the verdict. He closed his eyes. He lowered his face. He did not speak. The courtroom held its silence as instructed. The verdict requires some explanation because it is not a simple acquittal, and it is not the conviction the prosecution had pursued. Under Hawaii law, when a jury finds that a defendant committed the elements of attempted murder, but also found that the defendant acted under the influence of extreme mental or emotional disturbance for which there was a reasonable explanation, the charge is reduced from attempted murder to attempted manslaughter. The jury was not saying Gerhardt Konig was innocent. They were saying that the emotional devastation of the affair, the months of obsession, the collapse of their marriage, the belief that everything he had built was being taken from him, constituted extreme mental or emotional disturbance sufficient to reduce the charge. The crime he was convicted of carries a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. Sentencing has been set for August 13, 2026. He could receive anything from probation to 20 years, depending on what the judge determines. Arielle's response to the verdict was described by reporters as composed. She has not made extensive public statements since the verdict was read. Her mother, Judith Mast, attended every day of the trial. The family's attorney has indicated they will speak at the sentencing hearing. Defense attorney Thomas Otake said after the verdict, "We are thankful that they did not convict him of attempted murder, which would have been life in prison." He also said the defense respects the jury's verdict and that they plan to appeal. Prosecutor Joel Garner also addressed the media after the verdict. He noted that the jury had still found Gerhardt Konig guilty of a serious violent felony, that Arielle Konig's testimony had been believed, that the physical evidence, the rock, the DNA, the syringe, the documented injuries, had all been placed before the jury and weighed. The verdict landed somewhere in the space between what both sides had argued. The prosecution said he planned it. A man who brought a syringe to his wife's birthday hike had made a decision in advance. The defense said he broke, that a man consumed by grief and betrayal acted under the influence of forces that had been building for 3 months. The jury found that the truth lived somewhere between those two accounts. 20 years of potential prison time is the consequence of that finding. The Gerhardt Konig case sits at the intersection of several conversations that American society has been having simultaneously, and the verdict has contributed to all of them in ways that extend beyond the specific facts of one trail in Hawaii. The first conversation is about what premeditation looks like when it is rooted in emotional obsession rather than cold calculation. Gerhardt Konig was not a stranger who stalked his victim. He was a husband who, prosecutors argued, became consumed by his wife's emotional affair to the point where something broke. The prosecution described him as obsessed. The defense described him as devastated. The jury found a middle ground that the law calls extreme mental or emotional disturbance. But the underlying question, whether intense emotional pain can coexist with deliberate planning, is one that courts have wrestled with for decades, and this verdict did not fully resolve. The second conversation is about professional knowledge and domestic violence. Gerhardt Konig was an anesthesiologist. He knew what a syringe could do. He knew what medications could do to a human body on a remote trail with no witnesses. The prosecution argued that this professional knowledge was not incidental to the crime, it was central to it. That a man who spent his working life managing what enters a human body and what that does to consciousness brought that knowledge to a cliffside mountain in the Ko'olau Mountains on his wife's birthday.
The jury's verdict did not fully endorse that argument. They did not find premeditated attempted murder, but they also did not dismiss it. They found him guilty of a serious violent felony. The third conversation is about the two hikers who came around a bend on a trail in the right moment. Their names were not widely reported. They were simply two people on a hike in Oahu on a March morning who heard screaming and walked toward it instead of away from it. Their arrival ended the attack. Their testimony, describing what they found when they reached the couple, corroborated Arielle's account. They were ordinary people who did an extraordinary thing by choosing to walk toward her screams, and Arielle Konig survived the Palipuka Trail because two strangers chose to walk toward her screams. The fourth conversation, the one that Arielle's family and advocates for domestic violence survivors have raised most consistently, is about what a marriage license can conceal. The Konigs were a professional couple on a dream island, living what Gerhardt himself called a dream life. Two young sons at home on Maui, birthdays in Oahu. What that exterior concealed, the obsession, the months of silent deterioration, the syringe in a pocket on a hiking trail, was invisible until it was. That invisibility is not unique to this case. It is the defining feature of the cases that end the worst.
As of May 2026, the Gerhardt Konig case is in the 4-month window between conviction and sentencing. The next major event in this case is August 13, 2026, the sentencing hearing before Judge Karen Ahn in Honolulu. At that hearing, Arielle Konig and her family will have the opportunity to deliver victim impact statements. Gerhardt Konig will have the opportunity to address the court, and Judge Ahn will impose a sentence within the range the law allows, from probation at the minimum to 20 years in prison at the maximum for the attempted manslaughter conviction. The prosecution will argue for a sentence at the upper end of that range. Prosecutor Joel Garner has made clear throughout this case that he believes what happened on the Palipuka Trail was a calculated attempt to kill, that the attempted manslaughter verdict doesn't change the severity of what Gerhardt Konig brought to that trail and what he did with it. The prosecution will ask the judge to sentence in a way that reflects the gravity of bringing a syringe to a hiking trail and beating a woman 10 times with a lava rock. The defense has already indicated they plan to appeal. Attorney Thomas Otake said immediately after the verdict that the defense planned to challenge the conviction. The grounds for that appeal have not yet been formally filed. Any appeal would move through the Hawaii Intermediate Court of Appeals and potentially to the Hawaii Supreme Court, a process that typically takes years. Arielle Konig has filed for divorce. Her 2 young sons remain in her custody. She has continued to cooperate with the legal process and has said publicly she intends to speak at sentencing. What she says in that courtroom on August 13, 2026, after everything she has been through since March 24, 2025, will be one of the most significant moments remaining in this case. Gerhardt Konig is currently out of custody on bail, pending sentencing and the anticipated appeal. He has maintained that what happened on the trail was self-defense. The conviction says otherwise, not in the terms the prosecution asked for, but in terms that establish a permanent legal finding that he committed a serious violent act against his wife on a cliffside in the Ko'olau Mountains. There is one detail about August 13, 2026 that belongs in this ledger before this script closes. The sentencing date, August 13th, is the date that was set by Judge Ahn. It is not a date that any party requested specifically. It is simply the date the court calendar provided. But August 13th is 1 month before September, and September is when the Hawaiian hiking season traditionally ends. The trail where this happened will still be there. The cliff will still be there. The 2 hikers will not be identified by name. But Arielle Konig will walk into a Honolulu courtroom, and she will speak. Here is what the ledger of Gerhardt Konig says when you read every page of it. It says that on March 24, 2025, a doctor planned a birthday trip for his wife. He chose a trail that ran along the edge of a cliff. He brought a syringe. And on that trail, on Arielle's 36th birthday, in one of the most beautiful places on earth, he pushed her toward the edge and beat her with a rock until two strangers came around a bend and heard her screaming. It says that he ran from the trail, that he FaceTimed his 19-year-old son, that he said there was blood on his shirt, and it was Arielle's, that he said he would not be making it back to Maui, that he said he had tried to kill her, that his 19-year-old son, 19 years old, went shaking and crying to his parents' house and told them what his father had said, and then sat in a Honolulu courtroom and testified about those calls, while his father sat at the defense table 20 feet away. It says that a jury deliberated for a day and a half, that they returned a verdict of attempted manslaughter based on extreme mental or emotional disturbance. They found Gerhardt Konig guilty of a serious violent act against his wife on a Hawaiian hiking trail. Not the charge the prosecution asked for, but a finding, a permanent legal record, guilty. His defense attorney said they were thankful he was not convicted of attempted murder. Arielle Konig survived to hear that statement. It says that on August 13, 2026, Arielle Konig will walk into a Honolulu courtroom and speak about the syringe and the rock and the cliff edge and the screaming, about the birthday trip she survived, about the two young sons who are with her now and who will grow up knowing what the record says about the day their father took their mother hiking. And it says this: the two hikers who came around a bend in a trail and walked toward the screaming instead of away from it, they are not famous. Their names were not widely reported. They were just two people on a hike in Hawaii on an ordinary March morning. And because they kept walking, Arielle Konig is alive. Because they kept walking, there was a trial. Because they kept walking, there is a ledger entry that says guilty. Sometimes that is how justice begins, not in a courtroom, on a trail, with two people who heard something terrible and chose not to turn away. Subscribe to the Guilt Ledger. Sentencing is August 13, 2026. Every development comes here first.